The story begins in the opulent surroundings of a high-end retail store, a space designed to cater to an elite clientele. Crystal chandeliers cast a soft glow over sleek marble floors, and meticulously arranged shelves display luxury items with precision. The air is filled with the faint scent of expensive cologne, mingling with the hushed murmurs of affluent shoppers browsing leisurely. Behind the counter, the staff busily attends to customers, their movements smooth and professional. The manager, a middle-aged man named Richard, surveys the floor with an air of authority. Dressed impeccably in a tailored suit, he exudes an aura of control and confidence, though his sharp gaze betrays a tendency to judge quickly and harshly. Amidst the bustling activity, the glass doors at the entrance swing open, and a woman steps inside. She is tall, elegant, and dressed in a chic yet understated outfit that speaks of sophistication. Her presence is commanding, but not ostentatious, her movements deliberate and calm as she begins to browse the shelves. Her name is Vanessa, and she exudes confidence, her head held high despite the subtle glances cast her way. From the moment Vanessa enters, Richard's gaze locks onto her. Something about her unsettles him, not her demeanor or actions, but the assumptions he has already formed based on the color of her skin. His eyes narrow as he whispers to one of the sales associates, his tone laced with quiet disdain. "Keep an eye on her," Richard mutters. "I've seen her type before. They come in here pretending to shop, but they're just looking for trouble." The associate hesitates, glancing nervously at Vanessa. "Are you sure? She doesn't seem—" "Just do it!" Richard snaps, cutting her off. Vanessa continues to browse, unaware of the scrutiny she is under. She admires a display of handbags, her fingers grazing the fine leather as she considers which one to purchase. Despite her calm demeanor, she notices the subtle shifts in the store's energy, the quick glances from staff, the whispered exchanges behind the counter. Richard, convinced that Vanessa is up to no good, makes a quiet call to security. Within minutes, 2 uniformed guards enter the store, their presence impossible to ignore. They stand by the entrance at first, speaking briefly with Richard, who gestures discreetly in Vanessa's direction. As Vanessa moves to the jewelry section, admiring a delicate necklace displayed under glass, she becomes acutely aware of the guard's approach. Her heart tightens, not with fear, but with a deep sense of frustration and disappointment. She has experienced moments like this before, moments where her presence is questioned, her integrity doubted, all because of prejudice. The tension in the air is palpable as the guards stop near Vanessa. She looks up, meeting their gazes with a steady, unflinching expression. Richard watches from a distance, his arms crossed over his chest, confident in his decision to intervene. "Excuse me, ma'am," one of the guards says, his tone polite but firm. "We've received a report, and we'd like to ask you a few questions." Vanessa raises an eyebrow, her voice calm but laced with steel. "A report? About what exactly?" The guard hesitates, glancing at Richard for guidance. Richard steps forward, his expression stern as he addresses Vanessa directly. "We've had some issues with theft recently, and I couldn't help but notice your behavior. It's our policy to ensure the safety of our store and merchandise." Vanessa's eyes narrow, her composure unwavering. "My behavior? And what exactly have I done to warrant this attention?" Richard falters for a moment under her gaze, but quickly regains his footing. "You've been lingering in the store, examining items closely without asking for assistance. That's enough to raise concern." The accusation hangs in the air, thick with bias and assumption. Vanessa takes a deep breath, her mind racing as she prepares to respond. She knows this isn't just about her actions, It's about the prejudice that has followed her throughout her life, a prejudice she has always refused to let define her. The luxury store hummed with quiet activity, a haven of exclusivity where the wealthy came to indulge in carefully curated elegance. Vanessa walked in with the air of someone who knew she belonged, though she had long stopped expecting others to see it that way. Her journey to that moment had been anything but simple. Behind her poised exterior was a story of resilience and determination, one that carried the weight of countless battles against the subtle and overt biases she had faced throughout her life. Vanessa had built herself into a force to be reckoned with. As a child, she was surrounded by reminders of what society thought she could or could not achieve. Growing up in a modest neighborhood, she watched her parents work tirelessly to give her and her siblings opportunities they had never known. Her mother, a school teacher, instilled in her a love of learning, and her father, a mechanic with a mind sharp enough to fix anything, taught her the value of persistence. Vanessa excelled in school, but the path was never without challenges. Teachers underestimated her, classmates questioned her abilities, and the world seemed to whisper a constant refrain, "You don't belong here." But Vanessa never let those voices dictate her worth. She threw herself into her studies, eventually earning scholarships that led her to one of the country's top universities. There, she discovered her passion for business and innovation, a realm where she could merge her creativity and strategic mind. After years of climbing the corporate ladder, often as the only woman of color in the boardroom, Vanessa decided to strike out on her own. She built a successful consultancy, helping struggling companies turn their fortunes around. Her name became synonymous with excellence in the industry, and her clients spoke of her brilliance and her ability to lead with integrity. Yet, despite her success, Vanessa was no stranger to moments like this one, moments where she was judged not by her accomplishments or character, but by the surface-level assumptions others made about her. Richard, the store manager, had no idea who Vanessa was. To him, she was just another face that didn't seem to fit the aesthetic of the boutique. Richard had spent years in retail, his rise to management more a result of persistence than talent. He had always been a man of rigid beliefs, shaped by a world that validated his narrow view of people and their worth. His youth had been marked by insecurities, never the smartest in the room, never the most successful in his social circles. But he found solace in authority, in the power that came with his position. It allowed him to control his environment, to create a world where his judgments went unchallenged. Richard had developed a habit of profiling customers, often relying on stereotypes to guide his assumptions. A woman in casual clothes browsing the jewelry section likely couldn't afford anything. A young man loitering near the entrance, probably up to no good. His staff had grown used to his quiet instructions, his subtle signals to keep an eye on certain customers. Though some felt uneasy about his methods, they rarely spoke up. After all, he was the manager, and his word carried weight. Over the years, Richard's behavior had gone largely unchecked. Customers subjected to his scrutiny often left quietly, choosing not to make a scene. Others, embarrassed by the insinuations, avoided the store altogether. Richard dismissed their reactions, justifying his actions as necessary for the protection of the store. In his mind, he was simply doing his job. But Vanessa was not the kind of woman to let such behavior go unaddressed. She had dealt with men like Richard before, men who saw her as a threat to their fragile sense of control. They underestimated her, mistaking her calm demeanor for submission. What they didn't realize was that Vanessa's composure came from years of experience, from knowing exactly how to dismantle their assumptions with grace and precision. As Richard watched Vanessa from behind the counter, he felt a twinge of unease. There was something about her presence that unsettled him, though he couldn't quite place it. Perhaps it was the way she carried herself, with a quiet confidence that seemed immune to his judgment. Or perhaps it was the nagging sense that this time his actions might not go unnoticed. Vanessa continued to browse, oblivious to the whispers and glances from the staff. She had come to the store with a purpose, looking for a gift for her niece's upcoming graduation. The young woman had recently completed a degree in engineering, a milestone Vanessa wanted to celebrate with something special. Her eyes lingered on a delicate gold bracelet, the kind of timeless piece her niece could wear as a reminder of her accomplishments. She was about to signal for assistance when she noticed the subtle shift in the atmosphere. 2 security guards had entered the store, their presence far too conspicuous for such an upscale establishment. Vanessa's years of experience told her exactly what was happening. She had seen it before, felt its weight like a familiar but unwelcome shadow. Her heart sank, not with fear, but with the exhaustion of having to confront prejudice yet again. Richard, standing a few feet away, watched with satisfaction as the guards approached. In his mind, he was justified. He had seen Vanessa lingering near the jewelry section, her fingers brushing the display cases as she examined the items. It didn't matter that she was dressed impeccably or that her demeanor was calm and composed. To Richard, she didn't belong there, and her presence was reason enough to act. As the guards closed in, Vanessa turned to face them, her expression unreadable. She had a choice to make: to quietly endure yet another instance of bias or to stand her ground and demand the respect she deserved. For Vanessa, the decision was clear. She wasn't just standing up for herself, she was standing up for everyone who had ever been subjected to such treatment. Richard watched from a distance, confident that the situation would unfold as it always had. But as Vanessa spoke, her voice steady and resolute, a sliver of doubt crept into his mind. He had underestimated her, just as he had underestimated countless others. And this time, he was about to learn the cost of his assumptions. Vanessa was immersed in her search for the perfect gift. The delicate gold bracelet she had been eyeing sparkled under the display lights, its intricate design catching her attention. It was exactly the kind of piece her niece would love: timeless, elegant, and meaningful. She glanced around the store, looking for an associate to help her retrieve it from the locked case. Just as she raised her hand to signal for assistance, she noticed the subtle shift in the air. It started with the whispers. 2 associates near the jewelry counter exchanged furtive glances, their conversation abruptly halting when Vanessa's eyes swept over them. She caught the quick flick of their heads toward the back of the store, where the manager, Richard, stood with his arms crossed. His gaze was fixed on her, his expression a mixture of suspicion and disdain. Vanessa's stomach sank, a familiar weight settling over her. She had been here before, in spaces where her presence was questioned, where she was seen not as a customer, but as an intruder. Richard didn't bother to hide his disapproval. To him, Vanessa didn't fit the profile of someone who should be browsing the store's high-end jewelry section. Her presence felt out of place, though he couldn't quite articulate why. His assumptions, rooted in years of unchallenged bias, had already taken root. Without any evidence, he had decided she was up to no good. And, as he often did in these situations, Richard took action. He gestured discreetly to one of the sales associates, who hesitated before approaching him. "Keep an eye on her," Richard said in a low voice, his tone sharp. "She's been lingering in the jewelry section for too long. I don't want any trouble." The associate frowned. "But she hasn't done anything wrong. She looks like she's shopping." Richard's jaw tightened. "Just do as I say, and get security on the floor." The associate reluctantly nodded, walking away to notify the security team. Vanessa, oblivious to the conversation, continued browsing, though she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. Her years of navigating similar situations had sharpened her instincts, and she knew when she was being scrutinized. She straightened her shoulders, a quiet resolve settling over her. If someone had a problem with her being there, they could address her directly. Minutes later, 2 uniformed security guards entered the store, their presence impossible to ignore. The polished atmosphere of the boutique seemed to tense as they made their way toward Vanessa. Customers glanced up from their shopping, their curiosity piqued by the unusual sight. Security guards rarely patrolled the floor of such an exclusive establishment, and their sudden appearance drew attention. Vanessa noticed them immediately. Her chest tightened, but she forced herself to remain calm. She had done nothing wrong. There was no reason to feel afraid. She continued browsing, her fingers lightly brushing the edge of a display case as the guards approached. "Excuse me, ma'am," one of them said, his tone polite but firm. "We'd like to speak with you for a moment." Vanessa turned to face them, her expression calm, but her eyes sharp. "Is there a problem?" she asked evenly. The guard hesitated, glancing at Richard, who had stepped forward to join them. Richard's expression was stern, his arms still crossed over his chest. "We've had some issues with theft recently," he said, addressing Vanessa directly. "Your behavior caught our attention." Vanessa raised an eyebrow. "My behavior? What exactly have I done to warrant your attention?" Richard's gaze hardened. "You've been lingering in the high-end section for quite some time. That's usually a red flag for us." Vanessa took a slow breath, her composure unshaken. "So, let me get this straight. I'm being questioned because I'm taking my time to browse. Is that not what customers are supposed to do?" Richard's lips pressed into a thin line. He wasn't used to being challenged, especially not by someone he had already decided didn't belong. "We're simply following protocol," he said dismissively. "If you have nothing to hide, you won't mind cooperating." By now, a small crowd of onlookers had gathered, their murmurs filling the air. Some customers whispered in disbelief, while others pulled out their phones, discreetly recording the scene. The tension was palpable. The store's usual hum of activity replaced by an uneasy silence. Vanessa glanced around, her sharp mind assessing the situation. She could see the judgment in Richard's eyes, the way he had already decided she was guilty of something. But she could also see the growing discomfort among the other customers, the way they shifted uneasily as they watched the scene unfold. She knew she had an opportunity, not just to defend herself, but to expose the prejudice at play. "Let me ask you something," Vanessa said, her voice clear and steady. "If I weren't a black woman, would we be having this conversation right now?" Richard's eyes widened slightly, a flicker of panic crossing his face before he quickly masked it. "This has nothing to do with race," he snapped. "We treat all our customers the same." Vanessa's lips curved into a faint, humorless smile. "Do you? Because I've been standing here, minding my own business, and you've decided that I'm a threat. Meanwhile, you haven't questioned anyone else in this store." The murmurs among the crowd grew louder, a few voices murmuring their agreement. One woman, an older customer with a sharp eye, stepped forward. "She's right," the woman said, her tone cutting. I've been here for over an hour, and no one's questioned me. So why is she being singled out?" Richard's face flushed, the confidence he had exuded moments earlier beginning to waver. "We're just doing our job," he said defensively. "If she hasn't done anything wrong, she has nothing to worry about." Vanessa crossed her arms, her gaze unwavering. "The problem isn't what I've done. The problem is your assumptions. You saw me and decided I didn't belong, and now you're trying to justify it. But I won't stand here and let you humiliate me for no reason." The tension in the room was electric. The guards, who had been standing awkwardly to the side, looked at each other uncertainly. Richard opened his mouth to respond, but before he could, another voice cut through the air. "What's going on here?" The entire room turned as a tall man in an impeccably tailored suit strode into the store. His presence was commanding, his tone sharp with authority. He glanced around, taking in the scene with a critical eye before focusing on Vanessa. "Ma'am, is everything all right?" Vanessa met his gaze, recognizing the man as the store's regional director. She nodded, her composure intact despite the tension. "I'm fine," she said evenly. "But I'd like to know why your manager felt the need to call security on me for browsing." The director's expression darkened as he turned to Richard. "Is that true?" Richard stammered, his earlier bravado evaporating under the director's scrutiny. "I was just following protocol," he said weakly. "We've had issues with theft." "That's enough," the director snapped, cutting him off. He turned to Vanessa, his tone apologetic. "I'm deeply sorry for this, ma'am. This is not how we treat our customers." Vanessa nodded, her calm demeanor unwavering. "I appreciate that. But an apology isn't enough. This kind of behavior needs to stop." The director nodded solemnly. "You're absolutely right. I'll ensure that steps are taken to address this. Again, I'm truly sorry." Vanessa held his gaze for a moment before nodding. "Thank you," she said simply. The crowd began to disperse, the tension in the air slowly dissipating. Vanessa turned back to the jewelry display, her focus shifting once more to the gold bracelet she had come for. As she made her purchase, she couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction, not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever been subjected to such treatment. Richard, meanwhile, stood frozen, the weight of his actions finally sinking in. For the first time, he realized that his assumptions had real consequences, and that they would no longer go unchallenged. Vanessa, still standing near the jewelry counter with her composure intact, watched as the tension in the store simmered down. The regional director's intervention had begun to steer the situation in her favor, but she knew the matter was far from resolved. This wasn't just about her. It was about holding people like Richard accountable for the assumptions and prejudice they so casually wielded. She turned her gaze back to the director, her voice steady. "While I appreciate your apology, this isn't the first time something like this has happened to me, or to people who look like me. It's not enough to smooth things over and move on. There needs to be a deeper reckoning." The director nodded, his expression troubled. "You're absolutely right. We've failed you today, and for that I take full responsibility. But please, if there's anything more we can do—" "Actually," Vanessa interjected, her tone sharp but calm, "there is something you can do. Let's start by addressing your manager's actions and ensuring they don't reflect the values of this company. And while we're at it, I think it's time we talked about the broader culture here." Her words hung in the air, and the director glanced nervously at Richard, who stood to the side, pale and flustered. He opened his mouth as though to defend himself, but before he could speak, a voice from the entrance cut through the room. "Vanessa, is that you?" The crowd, which had begun to disperse, turned toward the door once more. A tall woman in a sharp black suit entered, her presence exuding authority and confidence. Her name tag, visible even from a distance, read Cynthia Adams, Vice President of Retail Operations. Her expression shifted from surprise to concern as she took in the scene, her sharp eyes scanning the store and landing on the group near the jewelry counter. Vanessa's face softened slightly as she turned to greet the woman. "Cynthia," she said, her tone measured but familiar. "It's been a while." The tension in the room spiked again as Cynthia approached, her expression growing more serious with each step. "What's going on here?" she asked, her gaze flicking between Vanessa, the director, and Richard. "Why does it look like someone's just been interrogated in the middle of my store?" The regional director stepped forward, his tone nervous but deferential. "Miss Adams, I assure you we're handling the situation. There was a misunderstanding involving Miss Carter, but we've apologized and—" "Stop right there," Cynthia interrupted, raising a hand to silence him. She turned to Vanessa, her tone softening. "Vanessa, what happened?" Vanessa took a deep breath, her voice steady but tinged with exasperation. "I came in here to shop for a gift. Instead, your manager decided I looked suspicious and called security. Apparently, taking my time to browse jewelry is enough to get me accused of theft." Cynthia's expression darkened as she turned to Richard, her gaze icy. "Is that true?" Richard stammered, his earlier bravado reduced to a fumbling mess. I was just following protocol," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "We've had issues with theft recently, and I thought—" "You thought what?" Cynthia snapped, her tone cutting. "You thought it was acceptable to single out a customer based on your assumptions. Without any evidence, you called security on one of our most important partners." The room fell silent, the weight of Cynthia's words sinking in. Richard's face turned a deep shade of red as the realization hit him. "Partner," he echoed weakly. Cynthia crossed her arms, her gaze never wavering. "Yes, Vanessa Carter is not only a valued customer but also a major investor in this chain. She's one of the reasons this store even exists. And you had the audacity to treat her like a common criminal." The onlookers gasped, the revelation sending a ripple of shock through the crowd. The staff exchanged horrified glances, suddenly aware of the gravity of the situation. Vanessa remained composed, though there was a flicker of satisfaction in her eyes. She had seen moments like this before, moments when the truth shattered the illusions of those who underestimated her. Richard took a shaky step back, his hands raised in a weak gesture of defense. "I didn't know," he mumbled. "If I'd known who she was, that's the problem," Vanessa said, her voice cutting through the silence like a blade. "You shouldn't need to know who someone is to treat them with respect. Whether I'm an investor or a random customer off the street, I deserve to be treated with dignity. Everyone does." Cynthia nodded in agreement, her expression stern. "Vanessa's absolutely right. And your behavior has not only disrespected her but also damaged the reputation of this store. How many other customers have you mistreated because of your biases?" Richard's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. He looked around desperately, as though searching for an escape, but there was none. His actions had been laid bare, his prejudice exposed for everyone to see. The regional director stepped forward, his tone firm. "Ms. Adams, I assure you this behavior doesn't reflect our company's values. We'll take immediate steps to address it." "You'd better," Cynthia said coldly. She turned back to Richard, her expression unforgiving. "As for you, consider this your last day in this position. Pack your things and leave." Richard's face crumpled, his humiliation complete. He looked as though he wanted to protest, but the weight of the situation rendered him silent. With a final, defeated glance at the crowd, he turned and shuffled toward the back office. His head hung low. Cynthia turned to Vanessa, her expression softening. "Vanessa, I can't apologize enough for what happened. Please know that this isn't reflective of how we run our stores. I'll make sure this is addressed at every level." Vanessa nodded, her composure intact. "I appreciate that, Cynthia, but I want to see real change, not just apologies. This can't keep happening." "You have my word," Cynthia said firmly. "We'll implement additional training for all staff to ensure this kind of behavior doesn't happen again, and I'll personally oversee the changes." Vanessa's gaze lingered on Cynthia for a moment before she nodded. "Good. Let's hope this is a step in the right direction." The tension in the room began to dissipate as the crowd slowly dispersed, murmuring among themselves. The staff, visibly shaken, resumed their tasks with a renewed sense of caution. Vanessa completed her purchase, the gold bracelet she had chosen now a symbol of resilience and victory. As she exited the store, she felt the weight of the encounter settle over her. It wasn't the first time she had faced such treatment, and she knew it wouldn't be the last. But this time, she had made her voice heard, ensuring that the consequences of prejudice were impossible to ignore. Behind her, Cynthia watched Vanessa leave, her expression thoughtful. She had seen the damage that unchecked biases could cause, and she was determined to ensure that her stores became a space of respect and inclusion. It was the least she could do for someone like Vanessa, a woman who had refused to let the world define her worth. The events in the store had left a lingering tension, not only among the staff, but also within the organization as a whole. Vanessa had always believed in turning moments of adversity into opportunities for growth and awareness. She knew that simply leaving the store after what had transpired wouldn't suffice, not for herself, and certainly not for the countless others who had faced similar situations without the privilege of a public resolution. The following day, Vanessa made a phone call to the corporate office. Her tone was calm yet firm, her words chosen with precision. She outlined the events of the previous day, sparing no detail, and requested a formal investigation into the manager's behavior. She emphasized that this wasn't about personal vindication, but about addressing the systemic issues that allowed such biases to thrive unchecked. "I don't want an apology that's only skin-deep," she said to the executive on the other end of the line. "This is about accountability, about creating a culture where customers and employees alike are treated with respect and dignity." The company's leadership, shaken by the potential repercussions of the incident, quickly sprang into action. They knew that Vanessa wasn't just any customer. Her influence and visibility meant that this story could become a much larger issue if not handled correctly. A team was assembled to review the store's practices, including the footage of the incident and Richard's track record as a manager. What they found was troubling. Multiple customer complaints about discriminatory treatment, all of which had been quietly dismissed under the guise of following protocol. Richard was suspended immediately, pending the outcome of the investigation. His suspension sent ripples through the store and beyond, signaling that such behavior would no longer be tolerated. For the first time, employees who had silently endured or witnessed similar actions felt a sense of validation. Some even came forward with their own accounts, sharing stories of subtle biases and unfair treatment they had experienced under Richard's leadership. Meanwhile, Vanessa's actions had ignited a larger conversation. Using her platform as a successful entrepreneur and public figure, she penned an op-ed that was published in a prominent business magazine. In it, She recounted her experience not as an isolated incident, but as part of a broader pattern of racial profiling and discrimination that permeated various industries. Her words were powerful and direct, calling on companies to do more than just issue hollow apologies. "This is not just about me," she wrote. "It's about the countless individuals who are judged and mistreated because of the way they look. It's about dismantling the biases that shape our interactions and creating spaces where everyone feels they belong." The article went viral, sparking widespread discussion on social media and in corporate circles. Customers shared their own stories of discrimination, while others called on businesses to take tangible steps toward inclusivity. The retail chain, facing mounting public pressure, released a statement acknowledging the incident and committing to meaningful change. "We deeply regret the events that occurred at our store and the impact they had on Ms. Carter and others," the statement read. "We are committed to addressing the systemic issues that allowed this to happen. Effective immediately, we will implement comprehensive sensitivity and bias training for all employees, from entry-level associates to senior leadership." Vanessa, while encouraged by the company's response, remained cautious. She agreed to meet with the company's CEO and board members to discuss their plans in detail. At the meeting, she was candid, emphasizing that training alone wasn't enough. "Change requires more than workshops," she said. "It requires a cultural shift, a commitment to holding people accountable, and creating an environment where biases are actively challenged." The company agreed to her suggestions, including the establishment of an internal oversight committee to monitor incidents of discrimination and the creation of a customer feedback system that allowed concerns to be addressed transparently. Vanessa also proposed that a portion of the company's profits be directed toward community programs that supported diversity and inclusion, a recommendation that was met with unanimous approval. As the changes began to take shape, Vanessa felt a sense of empowerment, not just for herself, but for the impact her actions could have on others. She received messages from people across the country thanking her for standing up and using her voice. Some shared stories of their own experiences, expressing hope that her efforts would lead to lasting change. At the same time, Vanessa continued to reflect on the personal toll of the incident. She thought about the countless moments when she had been judged, underestimated, or dismissed, and how those moments had shaped her resolve. She knew that while this victory was significant, the fight against discrimination was far from over. But she also knew she wasn't alone in that fight. Back at the store, the atmosphere had shifted. The sensitivity training sessions, while met with some initial skepticism, began to open conversations among the staff. Associates who had once felt powerless under Richard's management started to find their voices, discussing the ways they could contribute to a more inclusive environment. Cynthia, the vice president, made regular visits to ensure that the changes were being implemented effectively. Her presence was a reminder that leadership was watching and that accountability wasn't just a buzzword. Richard, for his part, struggled to come to terms with the consequences of his actions. The investigation concluded with his termination, but not before he was required to attend a one-on-one session with Vanessa. It was an unconventional request, but one that Vanessa insisted on. She believed that real change required direct confrontation with the harm caused. When they met, Richard was visibly uncomfortable. He avoided Vanessa's gaze, his once confident demeanor replaced by uncertainty. Vanessa, however, was composed, her voice steady as she spoke. "Do you understand the impact of what you did?" she asked. her tone firm but not unkind. Richard hesitated before nodding. "I made a mistake," he said quietly. "I let my assumptions cloud my judgment. I didn't realize—" "That's the problem," Vanessa interjected. "You didn't realize, and yet your actions had consequences. This isn't about me. It's about the harm you've done to countless others. It's about the culture you perpetuated." Richard nodded again, his shoulders slumping. "I'm sorry," he said. "I don't expect forgiveness, but I want you to know I'll try to do better." Vanessa regarded him for a moment before responding. "I hope you do, because the world doesn't need more people turning a blind eye to their biases. It needs people willing to confront them and change." As she left the meeting, Vanessa felt a sense of closure. The incident had been painful, but it had also been an opportunity, a chance to shine a light on an issue that too often went unaddressed. And while she knew there was still work to be done, she also knew she had made a difference. In the weeks that followed, the company continued to roll out its new initiatives, and Vanessa kept a watchful eye on their progress. She remained in contact with Cynthia, offering guidance and holding the leadership accountable for their promises. Slowly but surely, the changes began to take root, a testament to the power of standing up and speaking out. For Vanessa, the incident was a reminder of the strength that came from refusing to be silenced. It was a reminder that dignity and resilience could turn even the most unjust moments into catalysts for change. And she knew this was only the beginning. The store underwent a transformation in the weeks that followed the incident. Under intense scrutiny from corporate leadership and the public eye, it began instituting new policies designed to ensure fair treatment for all customers. Sensitivity training became mandatory for every employee, and the culture of unchecked assumptions that had festered under Richard's management began to shift. Staff members who once felt powerless found their voices, encouraged by the changes and inspired by Vanessa's stand. Richard, however, faced the full weight of his actions. His termination was made public, a stark reminder of the consequences of prejudice in a world increasingly unwilling to tolerate it. While some may have seen his downfall as harsh, others recognized it as necessary, a step toward accountability in an industry where such biases too often went unaddressed. Privately, Richard struggled with the shame of his actions, reflecting on how his prejudices had not only cost him his position, but also damaged the reputation of the store and himself. Vanessa, meanwhile, emerged from the ordeal stronger than ever. Her poise and determination throughout the incident had won her the admiration of many. Customers who had witnessed the confrontation spoke of her dignity, and her op-ed continued to inspire conversations about racial profiling and systemic change. For Vanessa, it wasn't about being celebrated. It was about creating a ripple effect, one that might prevent others from enduring the same injustice. The day Vanessa returned to the store to complete her shopping was different. As she walked through the doors, staff members greeted her with a newfound respect, their actions reflecting the lessons learned from the incident. Cynthia personally welcomed her, ensuring she received the attention and service she deserved. Vanessa selected the gold bracelet she had come for, a small but significant symbol of her resilience and victory. As she walked out of the store, bracelet in hand, she was accompanied by a wave of quiet support. Customers and staff who had witnessed the events that day nodded in acknowledgement, their expressions filled with admiration and solidarity. Vanessa's head was held high, her stride confident. She had come in as a customer, been reduced to a suspect, and left as a catalyst for change. Standing on the sidewalk outside, Vanessa paused for a moment, the sunlight casting a warm glow over her. She reflected on everything that had transpired, the challenges she had faced, and the strength it took to stand up and demand respect. She knew the fight against prejudice was far from over, but she also knew she had made a difference, not just for herself, but for those who might walk through those doors in the future. Her voice steady, her resolve unwavering, she spoke quietly to herself, a statement that captured the essence of her journey. Never let anyone's prejudice define your worth. Sometimes dignity is the loudest statement of all. With that, she turned and walked away, leaving behind not just a store, but a legacy of change and empowerment.